Good afternoon. Great to see you all here. I love all these talks that have been going on today because it really is about persistence, never giving up. I want to talk about ambition, ridiculous ambition, billion-dollar ambition. We keep hearing, over here in the UK that we need to be like Americans, that Silicon Valley is the only place that can make this happen. But having been part of Halo from the very beginning, that company is halfway there. It's a $500 million app. Done here in London, co-founded by cabbies and real people, just like you and me here. So let me sort of walk you through the stories of what a lot of billion-dollar apps have done and how actually they're not remarkable people. They're not crazy, different people, dissimilar to you and me, but actually how those journeys really make sense the more that you know about them. But let's start by blaming someone. This guy, I think, caused all the problems that we have today. This guy was the world's first billionaire. John D. Rockefeller, self-made man, built his business in oil, became a tycoon, and at the wonderful old age, and in 1897, actually passed away as the world's richest person, worth $336 billion, and is history's richest person, and probably the richest person we'll ever see. So now that we know that we probably won't be richer than him or will ever see anyone who is richer than him, let's sort of figure out where we can go. Since him, and as of earlier this year, we've got about 1,800 different billionaires around the world, and they control an absolutely astounding $7 trillion worth of wealth. The point here is that people are becoming entrepreneurial, and more so. The vast majority of that wealth has been created by entrepreneurs, by people who started in families that had nothing, who were modest, who were people like you and me, and who saw problems out there and decided to go and address them and do something interesting. Today, we have this wonderful term called unicorns that has really been adopted by the technology industry. And again, something that used to be so medieval and beautiful and kind of romantic. It used to be the realm of girls and their tea parties, but now, my last slide sort of slipped, it's much more kind of aggressive, laser beams, all kind of crazy, and I think really represents and embodies a lot of the characteristics we all need to actually make it there. These are the 13 billion-dollar apps that exist today. These are companies that weren't around 5 years ago. These are companies that have generated incredible amounts of wealth and value because of the amazing things that they've done. And we're going to focus on a few of them and go through their stories and how they actually came about. This, just out of interest, represents the last 10 years in the technology industry. There have been $78 billion or more companies. And in the last couple of years, this sort of arm on the right-hand side has really extended crazily. And we'll talk about one of those outlying companies, the guys at Uber. Again, an industry where Halo is trying to compete, but where naturally an American has done better because of their persistence, and try and figure out really why. One of the reasons that mobile has become such a lucrative and fascinating opportunity is because of the simple, sheer amount of time that we're spending on our devices. And whether it causes loneliness or other problems, it is one of these behaviors that's not going to go backwards. And this is the last 3 years. We have pretty much, more than double the amount of time that we're spending on these devices, and it's the people who understand this behavior and are taking advantage of it that are seeing fascinating opportunities. Astoundingly, this is actually a 2 or 3 year old slide that I put up there on purpose. It's no longer, on average, that each one of us here will interact with our smartphone 150 times a day. It's more on the order now, today in 2015, of 200 times a day that these little devices are taking over our lives and taking over our attention. And as you can kind of see, as we look down the bottom of that, whether it's around messaging, voice calls, clock, and music, the vast frequency of these kind of actions is the exact actions and areas where some of the leading mobile apps are making huge inroads. But the world is changing. The opportunities that these kind of apps had 3 or 4 years ago are quite different. The app stores were a lot smaller, the competition was a lot lower. Today, if you're starting a business like this, and I still want to infuse people with hope, but also a reality check, is you've got 3 million competitors out there. You also have 85 billion downloads, which is an opportunity in terms of how frequently people are actually downloading these apps. But here is the really challenging number. The number of apps that people have used has flatlined. It was growing until the end of last year, and we don't really see this number continuing to grow. People, on average, everywhere around the world are only opening 28 apps on their phone every single month. But the worst bit is 75% of their time, of your time, is actually focused on your top 4 apps. So when you think about these new players and these new businesses that are going out there, this is not about creating something that is going to add to the amount of time that you're spending on your phone. This is about actually displacing an existing behavior on your phone. So the competition, the mindset, is very, very complicated. Every day in the US, there are 157 million people who go to work every day. That's the size of their super active workforce. And yet, if we look at this app here, it actually has 160 million people who play it every day, more than 1 billion times. 540 million people play it every month, 15 million people every day, and they spend over $2 billion on it. And I'm sure you all know it. Is this a good thing or a bad thing? I don't know. We'll let other people judge that. But the simple truth is that that game was made by 6 people in 3 months, and they thought it was an utter failure. It was a small internal project for King that was launched right before Christmas 2 years ago. And actually, the team was pretty disappointed in what they did, and they launched it in the App Store just before Christmas. Everyone went home. People went on holiday. Actually didn't come back until the end of January, and everyone thought that the analytics and measurements were broken in the game because the numbers were off the chart. Little did they know that it would actually turn into the highest grossing game pretty much of history. So again, don't be sad if something doesn't work straight away. The history of King, actually the company behind this game, was actually brewing for 11 long years before these guys actually came up with their first blockbuster game. I'm not sure whether I would have hung around for 11 years of persistence, evolving through web games, evolving through Facebook, and then finally getting to mobile. But again, persistence is a long, long journey. The guys who were the founders of this company, 4 out of the 5 founders persisted. Today, they're worth hundreds of millions of pounds, are actually happy, really nice guys. One of them left the company and was bought out for about £2 million at the time. Needless to say that he kind of regretted his decision. There are really 2 ways to kind of get into this kind of billion-dollar world these days. If you look at the companies that are really, really succeeding, one is to do something incredibly good and to do it a lot better than everyone else. But not just a bit better, it's an order of magnitude better. The other really interesting way to go about it is to actually do something that no one's really ever thought of before or done before. And these are the 2 kind of stories that I think are fascinatingly interesting. The first one, WhatsApp, really starts off with Tyler Durden and Fight Club. Jan Koum and his co-founder, the guys who started WhatsApp, actually spent 20 long years together at Yahoo. Yahoo makes all their money off advertising. These 2 guys collectively hated advertising. They hated their jobs while they were there. Post leaving Yahoo, they tried to get jobs at Facebook and Twitter. They were turned down. So they decided to go create their own company. And interestingly, Jan decided to create WhatsApp, but the first iteration of WhatsApp was actually created by him because he wanted an app that told everybody that he was busy at the gym. It was a status update app. It had nothing to do with messaging or texting. And actually for 9 months, he persisted and built this app. And people were like, yeah, it's probably not the most interesting thing. One, you probably only go to the gym once a month anyway, so we're not sure how useful this is. But he started listening to people eventually, and people said, actually, why don't you put kind of a messaging feature in there? That'd be pretty interesting. And so, we got a little bit more activity. Then what actually happened was fascinating. Listening to people back home in the Ukraine where he was from, they were saying, actually, we'd really love to message you because it's incredibly expensive to message people in California, in the US. And our text messages cost us 30 or 40 cents just to get through. Can you actually build us a version of the app that works over here? At the time, iPhone wasn't readily available over there, so they built a BlackBerry client. So while for the Americans it was all great to have the iPhone version of WhatsApp, it only exploded, and literally in the first week that they had a version of WhatsApp on a BlackBerry, did they get 200,000 organic downloads. And that's where everything kind of changed. These guys became super ubiquitous, and as you can see, just because they solved a very, very simple problem, which is making SMS messaging for free, they were able to grow way faster than any other competing company, but they kept their profile nice and low. And as of January this year, these guys actually carry more SMS volume than the entire world sees on every single telecommunications company as well. Which sort of justifies the wonderful price that actually Facebook paid for them at the end of the day, which was 15% of Facebook's market cap. Today, most analysts say that that was actually a bit of a steal. In terms of the valuation of the company, it's probably gone up about 50% since that acquisition. Another really interesting example that I want to kind of talk about when you think about an astoundingly big opportunity, especially in mobile, is really disrupting something that's already there. And again, WhatsApp did that quite well, but I think Uber did it much better. And again, this is an area that I know incredibly well with Halo, is how do we disrupt taxi medallions? How do we disrupt a highly regulated industry where the prices are high, where the service is not particularly good? Let's do something really interesting there. Today, the idea of picking up an app, tapping twice and getting a taxi or a black car or a private car to appear there a few minutes later is vaguely novel. It's not even particularly interesting. 4 years ago when we started Halo, people didn't believe it was possible, both drivers and people alike. And yet, you start looking at the numbers, especially Uber, this is astounding. Absolutely astounding when you compare the valuation of the company compared to whom? Compared to Facebook. These guys have a growth curve that the world has never seen before because it's an astounding and real business. Its valuation, right now is $41 billion, right? And I think most people in this room would consider that to be absolutely ludicrous. This number makes absolutely no sense to anybody, but if you've actually dug into the numbers and understand what this business has been able to do in 5 years, it's something that we could never fathom, even working in the technology industry for a decade. They're in 45 countries, 220 cities, and they've employed, as of today, 750,000 drivers. All of that allows them to turn over $8 billion in fares last year. Does a valuation of $40 billion kind of on top of that actually make it sound that crazy? When you think about opportunities, replacing something that someone does every day, doing it incredibly well, and then figuring out how to scale it is an astounding opportunity. And when you think about the future of where their model is going, I've got a good friend who used to be in the Android team over in the US at Google, and he took one of their self-driving cars to work 3 times a week. Out of about 100 trips, he almost died once, that's fair. But in the 99 other times that he went, it was perfectly smooth, wonderful experience. Is it that hard to imagine? And I only saw this last year when I saw someone's car park itself without them even touching the steering wheel. Is it that much of a stretch to think that we're going to have driverless cars that look cute, just like that one made by Google, on the road in 2 or 3 years' time? Google has come out there and said, we're competing directly with Uber, even though they're their biggest investor. Someone is smelling a huge opportunity here. So again, the rate of change of technology and mobile is fascinating and interesting. And I think one of the most interesting parts of it is that here in London, I think we're seeing it more. In Silicon Valley, we definitely see it. But the future is already here. There are early adopters of a lot of this technology. People understand that a lot of these things will change. And I think, interestingly, we're adopting them faster and faster. If you're looking for opportunities, and I'm always looking for opportunities to do new businesses, one thing that I came across in college when I was in the US was the 67 human universals. So these are the behaviors, the traits, and the features of culture and society of people that have now finally been documented to exist with every single culture in the world. So one of these kind of, and I've gone ahead and listed them here. Fantastic slide, very easily readable from the back of the room. But I've also highlighted the areas where people have already built billion-dollar companies. There's plenty of black text there that represent fantastic, interesting opportunities. Why is that interesting? At the end of this year, we'll have 3.5 billion smartphones around the world. There's a whole segment of the world's population that never had a PC, that never went on the internet on the desktop. There's a whole slew of people that will come in the next year or two, in the billions, who will only understand the internet connectedness because of smart mobile devices. If you're looking for opportunities, there's quite a few right there. One thing that I sort of love to point out to people is that out of all the billion-dollar companies that have been made out there, across those 68 or so, the average age of co-founders, of people who started these companies, who had these great ideas, it's not 21, it's not people who graduated from Stanford University. For consumer-facing companies, it's actually 34-year-olds. And for B2B companies, it's actually 37-year-olds. These are people who have been around the block, who have had experience, who've done it before, who have had plenty of failures, but who have built up teams and experience and suddenly understood that they can really launch something and put it together. And also, again, to kind of reiterate the whole notion of perseverance and persistence, the average time to actually build one of these companies is 7 years. So in order to really get there, don't think that it's a short journey. And the one thing that I really kind of want to end on is when you're kind of evaluating what is, a massively interesting and good idea, something that just appears inevitable, something that you think really should be there that isn't there, is often the answer to building something, a billion-dollar success. Thank you.